grasp reality, how we become discerning. And it says this, Proverbs 2, and this is going to be something of a summary between verses 2 to 11. Apply your heart to understanding. If I give you a little quiz or a little challenge here, is look for every verb that comes up. Apply your heart to understanding. If you cry out for discernment and lift up your voice for understanding, if you search for her as for hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord. That is, you will understand deep reverence, what it means to truly be in a relationship with God. And you will find the knowledge of God. Discretion will preserve you. Discretion will preserve you. Here's the promise. And understanding will keep you. You know what, as we look at, the big thing is the argument, there's the word it's used, the argument over evolution or creationism or intelligent design. But you know, the truth is, arguments aren't worth nothing. It doesn't matter. I'm yet to truly win an argument. I don't know about you. You know why? Because you argue with somebody, they have their point of view, you have yours, and the best you do is come away with a begrudging acceptance of what someone else says. Arguments are nothing. However, grasping the truth is everything. If we can get a hold of what is true, that is everything. And that's what this is about today. And this is where discernment comes in. And here's the first big thing to know about discernment. Is it doesn't have an intellectual anchor, it has a spiritual anchor. Real wisdom, real discernment starts with a spiritual anchor and then goes from there. Old Testament, move into New Testament. A young fellow named Timothy, he was under the tutelage of an apostle named Paul. He referred to him as Timmy. I don't know if that's trying to make that up. But anyway, 2 Timothy 2:24 says, and he's saying to him, and a servant of the Lord must. Okay, here you go. Are you a servant of the Lord? Here's for you. This is a template. As Steve and I were talking earlier, I think we kind of came up with a good term, rules of engagement. Here it is. The rules of engagement with anybody and you with your faith. It says this, the servant of the Lord must not quarrel, but be gentle to all, able to teach, patient, in humility correcting those who are in opposition. Why? What's the whole thing? Because it's not about winning an argument. It's about God perhaps will grant them repentance so that they may know the truth. As a servant of God, you are not protecting the gospel. You are not. What you are doing is trying to open the opportunity for people to know the truth by keeping their hearts soft that God may speak to them. That's what it's about, is staying open to the truth. Now, I wouldn't even bother saying, well, do you agree with this because you're in a church and who's going to throw up their hand and say, I disagree with the Bible? It's not really going to happen. However, even as we agree and we give lip service to this, all you got to do is hit a hot button and you see what Christians can really be like. And here is a hot button. That's the big thing of talking on this. I know as myself, what happens, the first thing you hear something you really adamantly don't believe, and the steam starts coming out your ears, and you're ready to blast somebody, and all of this rules of engagement go right out the window. So what we are doing here today, and I know this even with evolution in particular, is that you don't even have to, you can disagree, even if you don't disagree with the way somebody else disagrees, they can get angry with you. And Christians, I'm speaking of, I have found people be militant, sarcastic, confused in all of this, in the Christian side. But how about discerning? How about approaching it but not as a quarrel? How about approaching it in gentleness and able to teach? How about approaching it in humility? Whatever the hot button is. Well, the point of this morning is just getting a little practice. How do we take a statement that was candidly given that from a Christian standpoint really is not sustainable, that there must be some exception taken, but can it be taken in our rules of engagement as Scripture lays it out, as God lays it out? Well, that's the attempt this morning. How do we respond to Mr. Nunn? How do we respond to his whole thing? So here's what we're going to do. And this is where the fire hose kind of opens up. We're going to just kind of line by line go through some of what he said and see if we cannot look at it in gentleness, without quarrel, able to teach, and most of all with the big D word, which is discernment. Okay, there you go. You guys you could almost leave now, but not quite. So you can go out and say, yeah, it's discernment. So we're going to start with the first little snippet of what Mr. Nye had to say.
When you have a portion of the population that doesn't believe in that, it holds everybody back, really. We need scientifically literate voters and taxpayers for the future.
Okay, here we are on this statement that's laid out inherently. If you are a believer in something religious Christian stuff, such as an intelligent design, does that automatically mean that you are scientifically illiterate? Does it mean that you are actually non-intellectual? Well, I'll give Mr. Nye his due here, because if you look at a lot of the church response, I won't even call it Christian, the church response to some of the hot buttons, they do come across pretty anti-intellectual. But does it have to be that way? Is it that way with everyone? Just throw out a little bit of history here. Maybe some names you know. Gregor Mendel, mathematical genius who came up with the foundations for genetics. William Kelvin, if nothing else, maybe from school you remember the Kelvin scale. The guy was a founder of a lot of what we know in physics. Max Planck, who was a major contributor to the quantum theory in physics. Albert Einstein, ever hear of that guy? All believed in God. As a matter of fact, Albert Einstein said it was his view of God that sparked his interest in physics. So, just starting here, as even though he may have a point in how Christians can come across, is that it is not automatic that if you don't believe in this particular scientific theory or hypothesis, that you're anti-intellectual. You actually can be intellectual. You actually can be scientifically literate. So there's a bit of a premise problem there. But once again, in everything, where is the element discerning the element of truth in all of this? And I think he does have a point in this, is because as Christians, especially in the Western church, what are the priorities? Well, let me just throw it out to you to think about. Where does, in the list of priorities to go to a church, does discernment fall in your spiritual walk? Or the church that you go to, in that church, we promote a lot of things. Churches want to have great music. They want to have powerful worship and fellowship and all of these, which is good. You want to have great youth things and all that, which is good. But where does wisdom fall in the priority? If you see yourself looking in the phone book and say, oh, there's a church that they specialize in discernment, I want to go there. Chances are there isn't that kind of an ad out there. So discernment seems to fall to the wayside a little bit. And the problem is, as we go along, is that we use this faith for excuses sometimes. Is there faith in faith? Of course there is. Is there faith in God? Yes. If you think you know everything in a logical fashion, you don't know God at all. It goes beyond what we can know intellectually. However, that doesn't mean that there isn't an intellectual side. And sometimes we get intellectually lazy. Sometimes we even get lazy in our spiritual understanding. We just say, oh, I take it on faith. Well, it's great to take on faith, but are you doing it with discernment? Do you know all you could know in whatever that particular area is? Grasping reality involves discernment. Understanding Christianity involves discernment. Bill Nye might be onto a point here, only twisting it around a little bit, is that maybe the problem with the Christian response to some things isn't because we're scientifically illiterate, it's because we're biblically illiterate. Do you know, as a matter of fact, if you look at some of the leading Christian colleges in the country, they had to lower their requirement standard in biblical literacy to get into the colleges because on that bell curve, all the kids coming in were biblically illiterate or leaning that way. And compared to years earlier, they had to lower the standards. We're not all that literate biblically. So where's wisdom? Where's discernment in the priority? How do you do that without being biblically literate? It's important. Is Bill Nye, where is he right and wrong, and why do you think so? What level of discernment goes into why you think what you think about what he says? Him or any other hot button? Well, the point is that I said this morning, the hot button chosen is this evolution button. So let's start there. Bill Nye with evolution, and he brings up a pretty valid point. So I just let him say it for himself here.
Once in a while I get people that really, that claim they don't believe in evolution. And my response generally is, so why not? Really, why not?
Why not is a valid question. Why not? And even if you don't or you do, why? I'd start by saying this. I really appreciated the word he used here. He said, believe in evolution. Belief in itself is an act of faith, is it not? And you believe in things when it's beyond something you have seen with your own eyes, so you conjecture, whatever, but you kind of take it on faith. And anything involving faith is inherently, by definition, a religion. So there is a religious aspect, even to this thing called the scientific theory here, is evolution itself. It has a religious aspect. Why not believe in it? Why not? Well, we said when we started, a lot of us smile and say, yeah, we're Bill Nye fans because we like the way he explains scientific theory. And in effect, that's what we're talking about here, is he is talking on explaining, well, a scientific theory. So let's let him explain evolution to us. And then we'll look at it with some discernment as we go along. So, step one, how did the whole thing start? Explanation.
How did life get started on Earth? Where did evolution begin? Well, near as we can figure, the ancient Earth was covered with the ocean a little over 3 billion years ago. And the ocean was a sort of primordial soup that living things got started in. Scientists have done a famous experiment with primordial soup where we cook it. The experiment would look something like this. Put primordial soup in a big flask, cover it with what we believe to be the ancient Earth's atmosphere, which would be ammonia. And ammonia is the same stuff you smell when you clean a window. We cook it by heat from the sun, and this would be fresh water rain, which would come out of this boiling flask right here, and lightning from primordial thunderstorms. The thunderstorms make the molecules change and rearrange themselves. And eventually, we have found that we can reproduce tiny pieces of deoxyribonucleic acid, tiny pieces of DNA.
DNA.
The very building blocks of life.
The blueprint for future generations.
Can be made with an experiment somewhat like this one. So the primordial soup was very much like the ocean is today. Look at all these living things. The ocean's full of them. You and I are living things. The primordial soup is still cooking.
DNA is a molecule containing the genetic message, the blueprint for future generations.
Primordial soup, what he's referring to here is an experiment, the Miller-Urey experiment of 1952. And basically, it was a genius experiment. It's understood, or was conjectured, however you want to look at it, that the Earth in its early years had an ammonia atmosphere, among other things. And so they set up this mini prehistoric Earth where they took ammonia, methane, water, hydrogen, sealed it in a flask, then caused it to evaporate, shot lightning through it or electricity, like lightning through it, let it cool and condense, and then see what happens. A little simulation of Earth. And what they found was really pretty exciting. After a few days, they had amino acids form in this flask. And that's really quite an interesting thing. Should be pointed out that, and this is we're falling into the scientific side of things here, it was amino acids and not nucleic acids. In other words, just putting it in our terms, is that what they came up with was parts of the building blocks of life. It was these portions of things. And you know, in itself, it's kind of an exciting thing because it was hinting at something if it could be brought further. But since 1952, nothing more than the amino acids has ever been able to be formed. Life had never been produced. It's a long way from an organic, basic organic molecule to life. Is a long ways up in these building blocks. So the crucial steps are missing here. A good start, but it's a long way from what's being conjectured, from what's being stated. An argument against this, or a concept against this, which I don't think has ever been properly refuted, is something called irreducible complexity. Big $10 word, you can say that when you go up from here. You can say, what was the sermon about? This is about irreducible complexity. And, people think you are at a really smart church. Well, basically, it's a very simple thing, is that any cell, even the most primitive thing, is in fact like an organic motor. It needs a bunch of things. Think of the engine in your car. It needs a whole bunch of things working, systems working at the same time, or it simply doesn't work. And a cell is just like that. A cell needs something to hold it all together, so it needs the membrane. It needs its container. Within it, it needs some kind of a processor to take in the fuel or the nutrition and process that nutrition. And then it needs something to take that fuel or energy and use it throughout the rest of the cell. And then it needs something to expel the leftover waste, just like a motor. And unlike a motor that's significant to life, is it then needs a way to reproduce itself. And this is where it gets pretty hairy, because you move from this building block of life type thing to these incredibly complex organic strands of deoxyribonucleic acid, commonly known as DNA. If anybody can say that word other than the medical professions when they leave, if you can say that word, you get a free cup of coffee. Raised brain. Point being, though, it has to be all those systems working at the same time, or it doesn't function at all. How do you evolve several systems all at the same time? Now, the experiment, as far as it goes, is landmark. But to take this to the point of life would be kind of like this. We go out and we go out mining and discover veins of metal, like iron and stuff in the ground. And we know that these metals are also used in your car. So we deduce that your car evolved out of the ground. It's not too far removed an argument to that. It's heading in the right direction, but it's a long way from the deduction. Now consider what a scientific principle is defined as. A scientific principle is defined as this: one that is testable for consistency by performing an experiment. One that is testable for consistency by performing an experiment. That would mean that if we set up an experiment and every time we shot lightning through ammonia we got life, then it would be scientifically proven that this is the case. However, we never did quite get that far. And yet, we have an entire field of science that says it is founded on this principle. Is that scientifically even meeting its own principle? To me, it's kind of a little bit questionable. At least questionable. Am I not intellectual, or are you not intellectual? Are we not discerning if we simply accept it as is? I don't know. Well, let's move on. Let's say that we give the latitude, this is the case. Life started like this. An electrical spark set things off. That's the origin. But then we're a long way. So there you are, if we say it happened. Your first cell. Now, we have to go to the second, or the journey really just begins. How from that cell to many cells, to a plant, to an animal, to a primate, to Homo sapien. There's a long way to go. What's the agent of change? Something we call mutation. Mutation. Well, mutation is basically this. We have the DNA word here, and that's the second D word. So we get discernment and DNA. Okay, so there we go. But in DNA, in these complex, we know how it works. It is a blueprint. It tells your eye cell how to be an eye cell. It tells your stomach cell how to be a stomach cell and your brain cell how to... It is the blueprint, as it said, the blueprint of life. In the human DNA strands, there are 3 billion base pairs. 3 billion bits of blueprint information that we know of. They're probably still not all mapped. And keep in mind, in a mutation is simply something went wrong with a copy. It didn't turn out like the original in some way. And it can only happen in 2 ways. One is something got recombined, and the sequence is different, or something got left out. Nothing's going to get added. That's it. It's there. It's going to get recombined or deleted. Those are the things. So with mutation, with these faults in the copy, they are like, as we were saying in the first service we had, that mutation is like our copy machine. It's just every now and then you just don't know when it's going to make a mistake and not get the copy right. It's random. And that's an important thing to realize, that randomness in the copies that go on, in the copy mistakes. So here you have a choice. I don't know, some people are better in math. Almost anybody's better in math than me. But 3 billion combinations. How many combinations can you pull from 3 billion sequences? I don't know, is that 3 billion times 3 billion or something to that effect? It's a lot of different combinations that can come out of it. How long to produce life would you have to go through all those combinations? Now, when we talk the evolution side of it, the thing about it is that it's presented as a positive thing. One thing is mutations are relatively rare, but it's just like, well, when they happened, it was this positive thing, and it came up with something better. But here's where it gets really interesting, and the tip of the iceberg is that when mutations do occur, they are almost always negative, almost always lethal. Generally, when there's something goes wrong in a copy, something dies. Is what it is. As a matter of fact, the medical professionals in here work with mutations all the time. Cancer, congenital disease, birth defects, all of those things are mutations. And 99.9% of the time, it's a lethal mutation. As a matter of fact, there's a doctor, a pathologist, Dr. David Demick, in his career as a pathologist is dealing with mutations on a daily basis. So he has some opinions on this, and I wanted to share a quote of his that's great. And what he refers to, just to set up the quote, is talks about the blind watchmaker. If you've read anything of Richard Dawkins, who is a high proponent of evolution, also very versed in genetics, but in the school of evolution, he proposes basically this blind watchmaker as the mutations making an ever better watch by these random mistakes going on. So here's how Dr. Demick responds to the blind watchmaker analogy. Instead of a blind watchmaker, the mutations behave like a blind gunman, a destroyer who shoots deadly bullets randomly into beautifully designed models of living molecular machinery. Sometimes they kill. Thus, the blind watchmaker is an illusion. Worse than that, it is an intellectual and moral equivalent of an idol, an invention of the imagination to which superhuman powers are falsely ascribed. That's his thought on mutation. Now, not to even dispute the point, think how you will, as far as science as it stands now says the universe is 14.6 billion years old. The Earth believed to be 4.54 billion years old. And personally, I have no trouble with it at all. I know there's the two schools, and I got to get in it. To me, just simply because all it means is my God is just that much bigger. It doesn't make him smaller, it makes him bigger. Point being, even should the world be nearly 5 billion years old, and you look at a molecule or these DNA strands with 3 billion bits of information that can be moved around, and only .something% of them will ever be positive. I'd love to see the biostats on it. Is it even possible for there to be enough time if there's 4 billion years with 3 billion combinations? It doesn't even seem like the math adds up here. But that aside, let's give step 2 to the school of thought. Let's go ahead and say, here's the mutation. That's how things change. So it still needs a guiding force.